Hello to all. Today we will be discussing some parts of the alimentary canal. In the previous two videos we have just talked about the introductory part of the digestive system, and today we are starting with the first part of the alimentary canal, and that is known as the mouth. As we know very well that mouth is a transverse slit. Mouth is what? A transverse slit like this, horizontal transverse slit. It is an aperture which is surrounded by upper and lower lip. So I want to say mouth is a horizontal transverse slit like aperture which is surrounded on both sides by movable lip. The upper one is called as the upper lip and the lower one is called as the lower lip. Okay. One thing more, the lips are movable. It means muscle is present in the lips. So the muscles which are associated with the lips are called as orbicularis oris. Remember this thing, that the muscle which is found in the lip is called as orbicularis oris muscle. Also, serous glands are found on the inner part of the lips. If we see the inner part of the lip, on the inner part of the lip, special glands are found, and these special glands are called as serous glands. And these glands secrete a watery substance. And remember one thing, that these serous glands, right? The serous gland is the modification of the mucous gland. Serous gland is the modification of the mucous gland only, and that's why it secretes watery substance. Okay. Now we know that in the earlier video we have talked about that the next part of the alimentary canal just behind the mouth is the buccal cavity, and this buccal cavity, which is also called as the oral cavity, is actually divided into how many parts? The two parts. Fine. One is the initial part of the buccal cavity, this one, the initial part of the buccal cavity, which is also called as the buccal vestibule. I can say it is peripheral part, it is the outer part. Okay, this is the buccal cavity, so the outer part of the buccal cavity or the peripheral part of the buccal cavity is called as the vestibule, or also called as the buccal vestibule. And the inner and the central part of the buccal cavity is called as the main oral cavity. Fine. So now we are talking about the peripheral part of the buccal cavity known as the buccal vestibule. This buccal vestibule is bounded externally by cheeks and lips. Externally it is bounded by the cheeks and the lips, and internally it is bound by gums and teeth. Again I am repeating, the outer peripheral part of the buccal cavity is called as the buccal vestibule. It is bounded externally by the cheeks and the lips, and internally it is lined by or bounded by the gums and the teeth. And it has been said that the food is stored temporarily for some time in this part of the buccal cavity. Fine. And now coming to the main part of the oral cavity, which is also called as the main oral cavity, inner and central part of the buccal cavity. It is the inner and central part of the buccal cavity, which is surrounded by the upper and the lower jaw. And I have seen that a question was asked in the NEET that the main oral cavity or the oral cavity is lined by which epithelium. So remember this thing, that the main oral cavity, or we can say it as the oral cavity, is lined by moist stratified squamous epithelium. If the question is asked in the examination that the oral cavity is bounded by, so you will answer it, it is lined by or it is bounded by moist stratified squamous epithelium. Is it clear? So this is what about the buccal cavity. Now buccal cavity is a very important part of the alimentary canal, and it consists of the three major parts. One is the palate, another is the teeth, and another is the tongue. Also, salivary glands are found in this region, the buccal region only. But just now I will be not discussing the salivary glands. Why? Because when we will be dealing with the accessory glands or the accessory digestive glands, at that time I will be talking about the salivary glands. Otherwise, we have to discuss three parts which are found in the buccal cavity, and all are very important. One is the palate, another is the teeth, and the third one is the tongue. When we will be finishing these three parts now, then only our topic known as the buccal cavity will be completed. Fine. So palate, we have to study palate, teeth, and the tongue. Now starting with the first part in this video known as the palate. You know what is palate? Now this is the palate, the upper part of the buccal cavity. See, say for if this is the buccal cavity, then there are two parts of the buccal cavity. One is the roof, another is the floor. Okay. So I want to say that palate is found at the roof of buccal cavity. It is found at the roof of buccal cavity. Here, roof of palate is found in roof of buccal cavity. It is found in roof of the buccal cavity, and it is a horizontal structure like this type. Here, it is a horizontal structure, and it separates the buccal cavity. It separates the buccal cavity and the nasal cavity. Means just above the palate is the nasal cavity, and just below the palate is the oral cavity. So it is a horizontal structure which separates the buccal cavity and the nasal cavity. And because of this important structure only, we can breathe while we eat. What I have said, because of this special structure, we can breathe while we eat. Means at the time of eating also we can breathe just because of the palate, because it is a horizontal structure which separates the buccal cavity and nasal cavity. Okay. Now this palate is differentiated into how many parts? This palate is differentiated into two parts. One is known as the hard palate, another is known as the soft palate. If you touch your palate, the anterior part here, the anterior part of the palate, right, is hard, and that's why it is called as the hard palate. I want to say hard palate is found in the anterior part, right, of the buccal cavity, and it is hard because it is made up of bones. It is hard because it is made up of bones. Say for the two important bones which form the hard palate in the human beings is the maxilla and the palatine. Maxilla and the palatine bones forms the hard palate. So if somebody asks you why hard palate is hard, it is hard because it is made up of bones. Which bones? So you will say maxilla and palatine. And if you just rub your hand like this type, from back to forward like this type, on your hard palate, you will see that there are certain ridges found. There are certain ridges found on the hard palate, and these transverse ridges are called as palatine ruggies. What we call palatine ruggies. But remember this thing, that palatine ruggies are not so much developed in the human beings. Palatine ruggies are not so much developed in the human beings because we are omnivore, we are not carnivore, right? But there are certain carnivores such as the lion, tiger, etc. In them, the transverse ridges which are found right on the hard palate, known as the palatine ruggies, are very much prominent. But in we people, we are not having so much prominent palatine ruggies, right? Now the question arises, why? So in the carnivorous, especially in the predators, okay, because they hunt, right? Because they hunt the another organism. So what they do? They catch the prey with the buccal region, okay? So the palatine ruggies avoid the slipping of the food from the buccal cavity. But in we people, we are not having the well-defined palatine ruggies. So the role of the palatine ruggies, especially in the carnivores, is to prevent the slipping of the food, right, from the buccal cavity. Fine. So if somebody asks you that certain transverse ridges are found on the hard palate, that transverse ridges are called as, so they are called as palatine ruggies. What is the role of the palatine ruggies? It avoids slipping of food from the buccal cavity. But in human beings, they are not so much developed. Now coming to the soft palate. Soft palate, if we touch the palate from our posterior side, you will see that the soft palate is soft. Soft palate is soft. Why? Because it is not made up of bones. Hard palate was hard because it is made up of bones. Soft palate is soft because it is not made up of bones. It is muscular and it is made up of connective tissue. So I can say it is muscular and it is a connective tissue part. Now what happens from the posterior region of the soft palate? Posterior region means which is towards the pharynx region. From the posterior region of the soft palate, a outgrowth of the soft palate hangs towards the pharynx, and that outgrowth is called as velum palati. Very, very important. That outgrowth is called as velum palati, or it is also called as uvula. Okay, what I have said, the posterior part of the soft palate hangs towards the pharynx region, and that overhanging of the soft palate is called as velum palati, or uvula. Okay, and now the question arises that what is the role of the velum palati or the uvula? So it covers opening of the internal nostrils. It covers the opening of the internal nostrils at the time of the food ingestion, so that the food particles may not enter into the nasal tract. Again I am repeating, what is the role of the velum palati or the uvula? It covers the internal nostrils at the time of the food ingestion or swallowing of the food, to avoid any entry of the food in the nasal tract. Is it clear? So this is the role of the velum palati. So in this video we have just discussed today about the palate part of the buccal cavity, but the two important parts left, the teeth and the tongue, right, that will be discussed in the next upcoming videos. So keep watching and thanks a lot.